Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. Is the media to blame for sweeping Joe Biden's physical and mental decline under the rug? And should the attempted assassination of Donald Trump not have been so much of a shock given the political landscape in the US? These are the thoughts of academic and author Jonathan Turley, who's written a book called The Indispensable Right, Free Speech in an Age of Rage. And I'm delighted to say Jonathan joins us now. So, Jonathan, let's take the Biden side of it first of all. I'm presuming, given you've written the book, it's not that much of a surprise to you, but how much blame should we be laying?
Well, it's not a surprise. While this is not our first age of rage, it may be the most dangerous. And the president has contributed to that. You know, we've had what I call in the book rage rhetoric, which we've had a struggle with since the founding of the country, where rage rhetoric often turns into a type of state rage as the government cracks down on political dissidents and groups. The president has contributed to that environment. I mean, he has really stoked these groundless fears that this will be our last democratic election, which is absolutely perverse and absurd. He has called President Trump supporters enemies of the people. He suggested that we would be going back to the Confederacy. You know, and his supporters have ratcheted up that rhetoric even further. We had someone on MSNBC, Rachel Maddow, say that a recent decision means that Trump can order now death squads to roam our streets. Others have said that if Trump is elected, gays and reporters will be disappeared. That's the level of rhetoric. And most people hear that and they go, come on. But there's a certain percentage that hears that, and they hear not a warning, but a license to do whatever they need to do to stop Trump.
Is there some validity in looking at the other side, the people making claims of unfair elections, fixed elections, also that being another way to end your democracy?
Look, I think there's criticism on both sides. I've said that in my book, that rage rhetoric doesn't have a singular home. I mean, both the left and the right have engaged in it. In many ways, Donald Trump really sort of introduced a type of retail rage. He knew that many people in this country felt disenfranchised, disconnected. And he really was able to harness that in 2016. I think he's doing it again. You know, I didn't feel like 2020 had that feeling, but it does now. You know, before he was elected, I wrote a column for USA Today in 2015 saying this guy could win. Because everywhere I was going, people were talking about Donald Trump. Many of them said he didn't like him, but they still wanted him to be a president. You're sort of getting that feel again, that the anti-establishment sentiments are rising.
Is there any way back from this? If the graph that you've effectively plotted in words there is that it's getting worse because it's successful, would it take both parties, both sides of the debate to lower the temperature? But it would be more successful just for one of them to flip and get all rage-filled again. Are you doomed, basically?
Well, that, of course, is the problem, is that rage often is met with rage. You know, there's actually an interesting comparison in the 2024 election to the 1800 election. I draw this comparison in The Indispensable Right. And it was in 1800 that Thomas Jefferson ran against John Adams. He ran on a platform of free speech. John Adams had proven to be a terrible hypocrite. He essentially replicated the British prosecutions for sedition against speech. And Thomas Jefferson ran against him on that basis. But we had the very same hyperbolic and inflammatory language from both parties, newspapers that were aligned with one side or the other. This is very similar to that. In addition, one of the issues was the criminalization of politics. You know, Jeffersonian said with some grounds that Adams was using the criminal justice system against his opponents, and that is being repeated today. The other similarity is Joe Biden is arguably the most anti-free speech president since John Adams. I mean, we have had the establishment, and I go into this in the book, of an unprecedented system of censorship. One federal judge referred to it as Orwellian. It's massive. And the reason that this is such a dangerous time for free speech is that we've never had this alliance of government, corporations, academia, and the media. Of all the periods I go through in the book, that has never come together, because the book sort of talks about the personalities and periods that have helped shape our understanding of free speech. But we've never had this profile in terms of an opposition to free speech.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, you say that Joe Biden not particularly great on free speech. People would have watched the debate and might think he's not great on speech. Does he seem like he's got the mental faculty to be orchestrating all of the things you've just said, or who else is behind it would be the other question?
Well, it's very hard to say. He obviously has diminished mentally. His staff has, for 3 years, kept him from situations where he could be asked spontaneous questions. Even today, when he said, "I need to speak to the people twice," he just had a press conference and will do another speech from the Oval Office. They specifically wouldn't allow any questions. So they've gone back to this type of bunker campaign where they will sort of wheel him out, have him read from a teleprompter, and then wheel him back in. That's not going to convince many citizens.
Yeah. So the events of what for us was last night, will that shock your nation into what you're trying to say? You know, the issue about free speech and how important it is, and how rage is the opposite of the light that you wish to shine on things. Yesterday's events, will they actually be a wake-up call for America?
I hope so. Yeah, I've written 2 columns saying that we need to look at this. This is directly out of the book. This is a continuation of the pattern I describe in the book. And the book is really about what I call rage rhetoric and how it leads to political violence, how it leads to state rage. And the interesting thing, though, is that the anti-free speech movement in the United States came from higher education. As I have a long chapter on higher education in the book. I also talk a lot about England, both historically and in a contemporary sense. Free speech isn't a free fall in England. Great Britain has gone the way of criminalization of speech. You even had a judge not long ago convict a guy who they said had toxic ideology, as if you can have a thought crime. It's distressing to see a country that we inherited so much from to go down this path. But it's now reached our shores. We've been watching this wave build in Europe, and it's now hitting our shores. And it came out of higher education. It's now metastasized into the media. And the Democratic Party is now wholeheartedly in favor of censorship and blacklisting. I've been a lifelong Democrat. I come from a liberal, politically active Democratic family in Chicago. I don't know what happened to my party. It used to be the Democratic Party was the party of free speech. Now, I've testified repeatedly in Congress, and the Democrats sound like Joe McCarthy. They accuse people who are fighting for free speech. One Democratic senator said they were Putin lovers, and others have said you're insurrectionist sympathizers. I mean, it's right out of the McCarthy period.
Jonathan, thank you for that. Author Jonathan Turley.